I'll never forget the moment I realized my home in Maple Grove, Oregon, was about to turn into a battleground. It was early morning when I drove back after 12 grueling hours on the night shift at St. Jude Hospital in Portland. As a floor nurse, I was used to long, exhausting nights, my body aching from my back to my shoulders. When I turned onto 14 Oak Street, where I live with my father, George Harper, I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching. Right in the middle of my driveway, the concrete path I'd swept clean for my dad last week, stood a silver-gray SUV, parked there like it belonged. The early sunlight glinted off its glossy paint, making me blink against the glare. I sat frozen in my car, heart pounding, mind spinning. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Last night at the hospital had been brutal, a feverish patient calling for me non-stop, a broken oxygen monitor forcing me to run to the supply room for a new one. When the clock hit 6 a.m., I left the hospital dreaming only of crashing onto the gray upholstered sofa in my living room for a few hours sleep. But now, this SUV blocked my way, shattering any hope of rest. I glanced down the street, a few empty spots not far off, close enough to park without invading my property. So why my driveway? Maple Grove was the suburban neighborhood I'd chosen for peace after chaotic shifts, red brick houses under old maple trees, manicured lawns, a welcome to Maple Grove sign at the entrance. I lived here to care for George, a retired electrician who stayed with me a few days each month. He relied on a clear driveway to get around when his legs failed him. I killed the engine, stepped out, my sneakers scraping the dew-damp pavement. A cold breeze blew through, tossing my hair. I approached the SUV, hands in my jacket pockets, eyes stinging from exhaustion, the dull ache in my back lingering from lifting patients all night. At first I thought it might be an emergency, someone needing medical help or a broken-down car forced to stop here. But there was no note on the windshield, no one nearby looking worried or apologetic, just the SUV, silent and foreign, like an uninvited intruder. I didn't have the energy to get mad, not yet. I just wanted to get inside, check on George and rest. A bad feeling made my heart beat faster, but I told myself it might be a mistake, someone unaware this was private property. I didn't want to fight, not now, when sleep was all I craved. I pulled a scrap of paper from my bag, scribbled with a nearly dry pen, "This is private property, please don't park here again, thanks," and tucked it under the wiper. Then I got back in my car, drove to a rare open spot on the street, hard to find in Maple Grove, and parked, hands trembling from fatigue. As I stepped out, slinging my heavy nurse's bag over my shoulder, I glanced at the SUV again. I trudged to the house, the bag weighing my shoulder down like a reminder I wasn't free to rest yet. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, warm air rushing out, carrying the faint smell of coffee George brewed every morning. I dropped my bag on the floor, sneakers brushing the entry mat, and called softly, "Dad, I'm home." From the living room, I heard the TV muttering, a morning news show George liked to watch to stay connected to the world, as he put it. He appeared in the doorway, in his wheelchair, thin hands gripping the armrests. His silver hair was mussed, and his deep brown eyes, identical to mine, looked at me with faint concern. "You okay, Emma?" he asked, voice raspy with age. "You look like you just ran a marathon." I gave a weak smile, hiding my exhaustion. "I'm fine, just a long shift, but something weird happened." I quickly told him about the silver-gray SUV parked smack in our driveway. George frowned, rolled to the window, and peeked through the blinds. The car was still there, silent in the morning light, like a boulder blocking the path I'd kept clear for him. "Probably just a mistake," he said, his tone calm as always. "Maybe they left it overnight, and will move it soon." I nodded, hoping he was right. Either way, I didn't have the strength to do more than hope right then. I shuffled to the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water and gulped it down, trying to ease the headache brewing. George rolled in behind me, stopping at the dining table. "Did you leave a note?" he asked, tapping the worn wooden tabletop. "Yeah," I replied, setting the glass down. "Kept it short, polite, hope they see it and move before I wake up." He nodded, but I caught a flicker of worry in his eyes. George didn't say it, but I knew how much he relied on that driveway. On bad days, when arthritis locked his legs, he needed me to wheel him from the door to the car without obstacles. That SUV wasn't just an annoyance, it was a small but real threat to his safety. I leaned against the counter, eyes burning from lack of sleep. "If it's still there when I wake up, I'll figure it out," I said, keeping my tone steady so he wouldn't worry. George smiled faintly, but I knew he wasn't fully at ease. "Don't make a fuss over me, Emma. You're already worn out." I nodded, but inside a spark of irritation flared. I'd tried to stay positive. Maybe it was an emergency, or someone's car trouble left them no choice. But glancing out the window again, seeing that pristine, unscratched SUV with no signs of distress, I started to doubt. Maple Grove wasn't so short on parking. I'd just parked my own car a few houses down without trouble. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I'm going to bed," I told George, stepping past him toward the living room. "Call if you need anything." He nodded, rolled back to the sofa, and I heard the TV volume rise as I climbed the stairs. I collapsed onto my bed, mind still swirling with the SUV. I told myself it was a minor glitch, a one-off, and it'd be gone when I woke up. I woke hours later, body heavy as lead, mind foggy from short, interrupted sleep, cut off by a hospital call asking if I could take the night shift. I declined, voice rough, and stumbled out of bed, barefoot on the cold wood floor. Pale afternoon light filtered through the blinds, making me blink as I descended the stairs. George sat in the living room, remote in hand, but his eyes were on the window. "That car still there?" I asked, already guessing from his expression. He nodded slowly. "No one's come for it." I was going to get the mail, but his voice trailed off, and a quiet anger simmered in my chest. I yanked the blinds aside, and sure enough, the silver-gray SUV still sat in our driveway, like a silent taunt. The note I'd left that morning was gone from the wiper. Instead, I spotted a crumpled scrap in the bushes nearby. My blood heated. Someone had read it, torn it, and tossed it like trash. I turned to George, forcing my voice calm. "I'll go check it out. You stay here." He nodded, but I saw his hands tighten on the wheelchair grips. He was worried, even if he didn't say it. I slipped on shoes and stepped outside, the chilly Maple Grove dusk making me shiver. I stood before the SUV, hands on hips, staring as if it might explain itself. No temporary tags, no signs of breakdown, just a sleek, clean luxury car, clearly owned by someone not in distress. I was about to bend down and grab the torn note from the bushes when a figure emerged from the house across the street, 15 Oak Street. A woman strode out, steps brisk, her short blonde bob framing an angular face. She wore a crisp white blouse and khaki pants, clutching a thick stack of papers, her sharp gaze locked on me. I recognized her instantly, Linda Carter, the new Maple Grove HOA president. I'd never spoken to her directly, but neighbors whispered about her strictness, fining people for grass half an inch too tall, sending warnings for trash bins out on the wrong day. "What are you doing near my car?" Linda's voice cut through the quiet, high-pitched and startling me. I looked up, trying to stay calm despite my racing heart. "This yours?" I asked, voice shaky with surprise. Linda crossed her arms, a smirk flickering on her lips. "Yes, problem." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "This is my driveway, private property. You parked here without asking, and I left a note, but..." I pointed at the crumpled paper in the bushes. Linda glanced at it, then shrugged like it didn't matter. "The street doesn't have enough parking," she said, her tone like she was lecturing a child. "I've got important HOA business and I needed a spot. You don't always use this driveway, do you?" My cheeks burned, but I kept my cool. "My elderly dad's inside. He needs it clear for his wheelchair. I left a note asking you to move, but you threw it away." Linda let out a short, sharp laugh that made me stiffen. "Look, I'm the HOA president. I know the rules here. You don't own the whole street." She gestured at my driveway like it was public property. "If you really cared, why not talk to me first?" I bit my lip, holding back anger. "I tried, through the note you trashed." Linda shrugged again, stepped to her car and unlocked it with a beep. "If you want me to move, you'll need to do more than scribble nonsense on paper." She climbed in, slammed the door, and started the engine. Linda Carter drove her silver-gray SUV into her garage at 15 Oak Street, just steps from my Harper home, but to her, That distance was an invisible battle line. As the garage door slid shut, Linda killed the engine, sitting still for a moment, hands gripping the wheel. The brief clash with me had irritated her, not because she felt wrong, but because of that young nurse's nerve to challenge her. Linda smirked, muttering to herself, "Who does she think she is, telling me what to do?" She stepped out, heels clicking on the concrete, and entered her minimalist, two-story home, white-gray, and not a single item out of perfect place. Linda, 55, was once a sales manager for a major furniture company in Portland, before retiring early 3 years ago. She moved to Maple Grove after a dramatic divorce from her ex-husband, a lawyer she often called the traitor in fits of anger. With no kids, no pets, Linda lived alone in her spacious house, where she turned managing the neighborhood into her new life's purpose. When the HOA held elections 6 months ago, Linda campaigned relentlessly to become president, handing out flyers, inviting neighbors for coffee, and promising to elevate Maple Grove to new heights. She won by a landslide, not because people liked her, but because no one wanted to face her tenacity. In her living room, Linda set the thick stack of papers, HOA meeting minutes and violation lists on the glass table. She flicked on a lamp, sank into her white leather sofa, and began flipping through pages. Linda relished the power her presidency gave her. To her, Maple Grove wasn't just a neighborhood, it was her little kingdom, where she could impose order on chaotic people. Last week, she'd sent a fine to the Wilsons on Elm Street for leaving their trash bins out over 24 hours past pickup day. The week before, she'd stood outside single guy Jake's house at 7 Oak Street, measuring his grass with a ruler, then issued a violation notice because it exceeded regulations by half an inch. Linda didn't care about the whispers behind her back, fire-breathing hag, Maple Grove queen, as long as people followed her rules. But Emma Harper was a different problem. Linda frowned, recalling how that nurse had looked at her, not with fear or apology, but with anger mixed with resolve. Linda wasn't used to direct defiance like that. Most neighbors chose silence or submission when she showed up with her stack of minutes and haughty tone. But not Emma. Linda tapped her red-painted nails on the table, thinking. Emma's driveway wasn't an ideal parking spot, she'd admit that, but street parking was too far from her house, and with her packed HOA meeting schedule, Linda didn't want to waste time walking. Besides, she thought, that driveway was overly spacious for a nurse and an old man in a wheelchair. If they don't use it often, why make a fuss? Linda told herself, convincing herself she was in the right. I stood there in the dusk, clutching the crumpled note Linda had tossed, watching her SUV disappear down Oak Street. My heart still pounded from the confrontation, but I told myself it was a one-off, surely Linda got it and wouldn't return. I stepped inside, shut the door, trying to erase her smirk from my mind. George looked at me from the sofa, his eyes full of concern. "Everything okay, Emma?" he asked. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Fine, Dad, just a cranky neighbor." But as I sank into a chair, my body still aching from the night shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda wasn't the type to let things go. The next day, I had to take George to the doctor in Portland, a routine checkup for his arthritis. I woke early, brewed coffee, and helped him get ready, wheeling him out to the driveway to load into the car. When I opened the door, I nearly dropped my mug. Linda's silver gray SUV was back, parked dead center in the driveway, tires leaving faint black streaks on the concrete. My first note had been torn up, but I hadn't had time to leave another. My blood started to boil. I stormed back inside, grabbed paper and a pen from the kitchen counter, and scrawled with sharper strokes. "This is private property. Don't park here. Final warning." I tucked it under the wiper, trying to keep my hand from shaking with rage, then returned to help George into the car, thankfully parked on the street from yesterday. The doctor's visit went smoothly, but on the drive back I couldn't focus. The image of Linda's SUV lingered, along with her smug tone. "I'm the HOA president. I know the rules." When we pulled into Maple Grove, I hoped the car would be gone, but no, it was still there, my note now littering the ground, shredded into tiny pieces like Linda meant to send a message. George, beside me in the car, sighed. "She's not backing down, is she?" he said, his voice low but worried. I gripped the steering wheel, Not answering right away, adrenaline surged, wiping away the lingering fatigue from my night shift. A few days later, I decided to try a different approach. I installed a small security camera on the porch, a cheap one from an electronics store near the hospital, aimed straight at the driveway. If Linda wanted to play this game, I'd have proof. I thought she'd stop after driving off last time, but I'd underestimated her stubbornness. One evening, after a late shift, I drove home, eyes burning from lack of sleep. As I turned onto Oak Street, I saw Linda's SUV not only parked in the driveway, but angled to block the small ramp I'd added for George's wheelchair access. Oil from her car dripped, leaving a splotchy stain on the concrete. I hit the brakes, sat still in my car, anger flaring like a fire. I stepped out, the streetlight casting my tired face's reflection in the car window. George was inside, he couldn't get out like this, and if there was an emergency, we'd be in trouble. I stared at the SUV, hands clenched until my nails dug into my palms. Linda wasn't just ignoring me, she was taunting me. I pulled out my phone, checked the security camera via the app. The footage showed Linda parking at 6 p.m., stepping out with that familiar smirk, holding my last note. She tore it up in front of the lens, tossed the scraps to the ground, and walked back to her house like nothing happened. I stood there, breathing hard, adrenaline pulsing through my veins. I'd tried politeness, tried warnings, but Linda didn't care. She thought she could do anything with her HOA president title. I glanced at the house, thinking of George. He didn't deserve this because of a neighbor's arrogance. Enough was enough. I wasn't playing the patience game anymore. I marched inside, slamming the door so hard George flinched, looking up from the sofa with worried eyes. "Emma, what's wrong?" he asked, setting the TV remote down. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in the anger still boiling after seeing Linda's SUV blocking the driveway. "She parked there again," I said, voice trembling. "This time she's blocking your ramp too." George sighed, rolled closer to the window and peered out. Under the streetlight, the oil slick from Linda's car gleamed like a taunt. "She's not stopping, is she?" he said, his tone low but helpless. I nodded, fists clenched. "I'll handle it. Don't worry, Dad." The next day, I decided not to confront Linda directly again. Not yet. I'd tried notes, tried talking, and it only made her more aggressive. I needed more info, maybe some backup. I thought of Tom and Lisa Bennett, the couple at 10 Oak Street, 2 houses down. They were the friendliest neighbors in Maple Grove. Tom, a retired carpenter always ready to fix things, and Lisa, a local librarian who brought homemade cookies to say hi. If anyone knew how to deal with Linda, it'd be them. That afternoon, after giving George his meds and settling him in, I knocked on the Bennett's door. Lisa opened it, a bright smile on her round face. "Emma, come in. I just baked banana bread." I stepped inside, the sweet smell easing some of my tension. Tom sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand, looking up to greet me. "You look stressed," he said, his voice deep and warm. I sat, took a slice of bread from Lisa, and spilled everything from Linda's SUV, the torn notes, to last night's driveway blockade. When I mentioned Linda, Lisa's face tightened, and Tom frowned. "She's the neighborhood nightmare," Lisa said, setting the bread tray down. "Last month, Linda fined us for painting our fence light gray. She said it wasn't on the HOA's approved color list. We had to repaint it white, cost us $100. Tom nodded, adding, "And she hauled me out front because I left wood in the backyard for over 2 days. She stood there with a tape measure, said it was a hazardous materials violation. Ridiculous." I listened, feeling anger mixed with relief. I wasn't the only one suffering Linda. "So what did you do?" I asked. Lisa sighed. "We gave in. Didn't want trouble. Linda has a way of making things personal." I told them about George, how he needed the driveway for safe mobility. Tom nodded sympathetically. "You're smart to get that camera. Linda hates being challenged, but with proof, she can't argue." Lisa chimed in. "We're with you, Emma, but don't expect us to step up. Linda once threatened to report Tom to the local Carpenters Guild over something petty. She's unhinged." I nodded, a bit disappointed, but not surprised. Linda was clearly Maple Grove's shared terror. I decided to try another tack, emailing the HOA board. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, typing a concise but firm letter, attaching photos from the security camera. Linda parking, tearing my note, leaving oil stains. I sent it to the HOA's general address, hoping someone on the board would step in. But the next morning, I got a reply from Linda herself. As president, your claims are baseless. Your driveway isn't an HOA no parking zone. Please stop bothering the board with personal issues. I read it over and over, blood rushing to my face. Linda wasn't just dismissing me, she was painting me as the troublemaker. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard after Linda's email. Her condescending words echoed in my head. Your claims are baseless. She wasn't just ignoring me, she was making me the villain in my own neighborhood. I glanced at George asleep on the sofa, his steady breathing calming me slightly, but not enough to douse the smoldering anger. Linda had gone too far, blocking the driveway, threatening my dad's safety, and now denying all accountability. I couldn't take it anymore, but I didn't want to act rashly. I needed to know where I stood, legally, before doing anything. That afternoon, after brewing tea for George and making sure he was okay, I texted Ryan Nguyen, my college best friend, now a property dispute lawyer in Portland. We'd studied biology together at the University of Oregon, but while I switched to nursing, Ryan went on to law school. He was always my go-to for advice, not just because he was sharp, but because he knew me better than anyone. Need to see you ASAP. Neighbor trouble, I texted. Ryan replied instantly, 4 p.m., Bean and Brew in downtown Portland. Bring me coffee too. I smiled faintly, at least someone could lighten this storm. I drove to Portland, mind swirling with Linda's SUV and her smirk. Bean and Brew was a cozy little spot, the smell of roasted coffee hitting me as I pushed the door open. Ryan sat in the corner, in a blue dress shirt, typing on his laptop. He looked up, waved, his grin lighting up his tanned face. Emma Harper, you look like you escaped a horror flick, he said, as I sat, placing 2 cappuccinos on the table. Feels like it, I replied, sliding one to him. Then I unloaded, from the first SUV sighting, the torn notes, the security footage, to Linda's email. Ryan listened, nodding occasionally, jotting notes on his phone. When I finished, Ryan sipped his coffee, frowning. Let me lay it out, he began, voice low but firm. This is textbook trespassing. Your driveway's private property, not the HOA's, not Linda Carter's, no matter how much she crowns herself Maple Grove's queen. Under Oregon law, you can demand removal of any unauthorized vehicle there. I blinked, relief mixing with doubt, but she's HOA president. She said she could fine me if I escalate. Ryan laughed, the sound ringing through the quiet cafe. The HOA can't override private property law, Emma. She can threaten all she wants, but the law's not on her side. He tapped the table, getting serious. If she parks again, you can call a tow company, totally legal, but do it right. Take photos, log times, keep your camera footage. If she sues back, you need solid proof of repeated trespass and prior warnings. I nodded, memorizing every word. What if she retaliates with HOA fines? She's done it to other neighbors. Ryan shrugged. Let her try. If she fines you over something she caused, like that oil stain, it's harassment. Document everything, emails to violation notices. I've seen cases like this 100 times. She's got no shot. I sat still, processing. Ryan's advice lit a spark in me, not just anger, but determination. I'd tried patience, tried peace, but Linda left me no choice. Thanks, Ryan, I said, voice steadier. He grinned, sipping more coffee. Call me if you need legal backup, but knowing you, I bet you'll handle her yourself. I gave a small smile, feeling a shred of control for the first time in days. Driving back to Maple Grove, night had fallen, streetlights glowing on the red brick houses. I eyed my driveway from a distance. Linda hadn't returned yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. With Ryan's advice in hand, I was ready to act. Linda might think she held the power, but I'd show her I wasn't a pushover. Next time she parked there, I wouldn't just warn, I'd call the tow truck. I didn't have to wait long to test Ryan's advice. 2 days after our Bean and Brew meetup, I drove home from a quick grocery run near Maple Grove. George needed more pain meds, and a few odds and ends, and I wanted to wrap up early to rest before my night shift. As I turned onto Oak Street, My headlights swept the driveway, and my heart sank. Linda's silver gray SUV was back, parked off-center, blocking both the driveway and George's wheelchair ramp. Under the lights, I saw a fresh oil slick spreading from beneath it, glistening black on the concrete. I hit the brakes, sat still in the car, breathing fast. Today was the home nurse's visit for George. If she arrived and couldn't get in, how would I explain this? I stepped out, the late March Oregon chill prickling my skin. I pulled out my phone, checked the security camera via the app. Linda had parked at 2 p.m., stepping out with that familiar smirk, clutching a stack of HOA papers. She glanced at the camera, like she knew I'd see, then walked back to her house. I stood there, hands clenched, nails digging into my palms. George was inside, waiting for the nurse, and Linda had turned our driveway into her personal parking lot again. I thought of Ryan's words. You can call a tow company, totally legal. Enough was enough. I'd warned, I'd waited, and she'd answered with arrogance. Time to act. I opened my contacts, found Portland Towing's number. I'd saved it after researching post-Ryan. I snapped quick photos of the SUV from multiple angles, blocking the driveway, obstructing the ramp, oil pooling. Clear evidence, just as Ryan advised. I dialed, heart pounding as it rang. Portland Towing, how can we assist? A woman's voice answered. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady. Hi, I've got an unauthorized vehicle in my driveway, private property. I need it towed. I gave the address, briefly explained, and the dispatcher replied, we'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up, a mix of nerves and relief flooding me. The tow truck arrived faster than I expected, a big white rig with a bold red Portland Towing logo. The driver, a tall guy in a reflective jacket, stepped out, eyed the SUV, and nodded at me. This the one? He asked. I nodded, showed him the photos and video on my phone. I've warned the owner multiple times, but they won't move. He shrugged, checked the property tax bill I handed him. Proof the driveway was mine, then got to work. Metal clanked as he hooked the tow line under Linda's car. I stood on the porch, hands in my jacket pockets, watching the SUV lift slowly. Tires left the ground, leaving a dark oil smear on the concrete. Adrenaline surged through me, satisfaction tinged with unease. I was doing the right thing, I told myself. Linda left me no choice. 20 minutes later, the SUV vanished with the tow truck, leaving the driveway empty, as if nothing had happened. I sighed in relief, scanning Oak Street, half expecting Linda to storm out of her house for an immediate showdown. But there was nothing, just the wind rustling through the old maples and the flickering streetlights. I went inside, checked on George. He was chatting with the home nurse, a middle-aged woman named Helen. Everything okay? I asked. Helen nodded. He's fine, but he needs more rest. I smiled, thanked her, and walked her out. The clear driveway eased my mind. At least this time, George didn't have to deal with extra hassle, but the peace didn't last. That evening, as I brewed tea in the kitchen, a furious pounding rattled the door, nearly making me spill hot water on my hand. I set the kettle down, heart racing, and stepped out to open it. Linda stood there, face flushed red, clutching her phone like she wanted to crush it. You towed my car, she screamed, her high-pitched voice echoing across the porch. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to stay calm despite the adrenaline surging again. Yes, I said, voice steady. You parked in my driveway again, after all my warnings. Linda jabbed a trembling finger at my face. That's illegal. I had important HOA documents in there. You had no right to touch my stuff. I raised an eyebrow, unflinching. Illegal? No, it's trespassing on private property. I warned you enough. Linda breathed heavily, eyes blazing with fury. I'm the HOA president. I was on official business. You have no authority, I exhaled, keeping my tone firm. Being HOA president doesn't mean you can park on my property. The law's not on your side, Linda. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut, her face shifting from red to purple. You'll regret this, she snarled, spinning on her heel and stalking off, shoulders shaking with rage. I shut the door after Linda left, leaning against the cold wooden frame, my breath still ragged. Her angry footsteps echoed on the porch, blending with the wind sweeping through Oak Street. In the kitchen, the tea kettle was still hot, but my hands trembled too much to pick it up right away. George rolled out from the living room, his eyes full of concern. "What was she yelling about?" he asked. I forced a smile, trying to sound calm. "She's mad I towed her car, but it's fine, Dad. I've got this." He nodded slowly, but I knew he wasn't fully convinced, and honestly I wasn't sure I was as steady as I seemed. I just sat on the sofa, about to check the security camera to see if Linda would come back, when the doorbell rang, not a casual knock, but a sharp, insistent chime, like someone with authority. I stood, heart pounding, and opened the door. 2 Portland Police Department officers stood there, a tall one with short black hair, badge reading Reynolds, and a shorter one with brown hair, named Martinez. Behind them, Linda lingered on the driveway, face still red, arms crossed, eyes shooting daggers. "Miss Harper," Reynolds said, his voice low but polite. "We got a complaint about an illegal tow. Can you explain?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice even. "Yes, I called a tow truck to remove an SUV parked on my driveway, private property. I have proof." Before I could say more, Linda cut in, her shrill voice overpowering the wind. "She stole my car. I'm the HOA president, on official business, and she towed it without rights. That's theft." She pointed at me, fingers shaking, as if I were a criminal caught red-handed. Reynolds raised a hand, signaling her to stop. "Calm down, ma'am. We need both sides." Martinez glanced at Linda, then turned to me. "Can you show us the evidence?" I nodded, pulling my phone from my jacket pocket and opening the security camera app. "Here," I said, handing it to Reynolds. "The SUV parked on my driveway multiple times without permission. I left warning notes, but she tore them up. Today it blocked the ramp my dad, a wheelchair user, needs to get around. I've got photos and video." Reynolds scrolled through, watching clips, Linda parking, ripping notes, tossing scraps to the ground. Martinez peered over his shoulder, nodding slightly. Linda opened her mouth to protest, but Reynolds raised a hand again. "Let me finish." When the video ended, I added, "I called Portland Towing and showed them proof this is my private property. They towed it legally." Reynolds nodded, handed my phone back, and turned to Linda. "Ma'am, this driveway is private property. The homeowner can request removal of any unauthorized vehicle. This isn't theft. It's Miss Harper's legal right." Linda's eyes widened, her face flashing from red to pale, then back to red. "That's impossible," she shouted. "I'm the HOA president. I have parking rights for official business. She's harassing me." Martinez sighed, clearly tired of Linda's attitude. "Ma'am, an HOA title doesn't give you rights to park on someone else's property. If you want your car back, you'll need to pay the tow fees. That's the process." Linda's jaw dropped, as if she'd been slapped. "Pay fees? You expect me to pay for this?" Reynolds crossed his arms, voice cool. "Yes, that's how towing works." Linda trembled with rage, pointing at both officers. "This is a conspiracy. You're siding with her. I'll sue you all." Martinez frowned, his tone sharpening. "You called us over suspected illegal towing. We checked. There's no crime here. If you keep filing false reports, you could face a fine." Linda choked, her breath ragged. She spun toward me, eyes like knives. "You'll pay for this, Harper." "This isn't over," I shrugged, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. "I'm sure it's not." Linda stormed off, shoulders quaking with fury. Reynolds and Martinez nodded at me, their looks quietly saying, "We get it." After Reynolds and Martinez left, I stood on the porch for a bit, breathing the cold Maple Grove air to calm my still thumping heart. Linda had vanished into her house at 15 Oak Street, but her venomous glare stuck with me. I shut the door, stepped into the living room where George was watching an old news show. He looked up asking, "Police?" I nodded, gave a quick rundown. Linda called them, but they backed me. George smiled faintly. "Good job, Emma. I knew you wouldn't let her bully you." I smiled back, but inside I wasn't sure it was over. The next morning, Helen came for George's usual visit. I was in the living room, helping him check his blood pressure, when a loud thud sounded outside. I frowned, stood, and pulled the blinds. Linda stood by our mailbox, slapping a bright yellow paper onto it with a sharp motion. She glanced at the window, caught my eye, and smirked before heading back to her house. My heart sank. I opened the door, stepped out, the crisp morning air making me shiver. The yellow paper on the mailbox read in bold, HOA violation notice. I ripped it off, scanning it. Harper Residence, 14 Oak Street, fined for maintaining a dirty driveway. Oil stains detract from neighborhood aesthetics. Remedy within 7 days or face a $200 penalty. I stood there, hands trembling with the paper, blood rushing to my face. Oil stains? Her car left those stains. I had security footage proving she parked and leaked oil. This wasn't a mistake, it was retaliation. Linda was using her HOA power to punish me for towing her car. I glanced at the driveway, the glossy black oil streaks still there, an ironic proof she dared turn against me. I marched to Linda's house, notice clutched tight, determined to confront her. I pounded on 15 Oak Street's door, the sound echoing through Maple Grove's stillness. Linda opened it after a few seconds, in a gray sweater and jeans, holding a coffee mug. She raised an eyebrow, voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Oh, Miss Harper, what's the matter?" I held up the notice, tone firm. "You can't fine me for something you caused. That oil's from your car, I have video proof." Linda sipped her coffee, that smirk creeping back. "Come on, I'm the HOA president. I can fine any violation affecting neighborhood standards. A dirty driveway's a violation, oil from my car or not, it's your property, you keep it clean." I bit my lip, holding back anger. "This is payback for towing your car, isn't it? You can't do this, it's not fair." Linda waved a hand, cutting me off, her tone condescending. "Fair or not doesn't matter. As president, I say it's a violation, it's a violation. Fix the driveway in a week, or pay $200. Simple as that." She shrugged, like she'd just explained the obvious. I stood there, crumpling the paper in my fist. "You can't abuse power like this," I said, voice shaking with rage. Linda smirked again. "Try stopping me." She slammed the door in my face, leaving me on her porch, breathing hard. I trudged back home, notice still in hand, humiliation and helplessness mixing with fury. Helen stepped out from the living room, done with George, looking at me with concern. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded curtly, not wanting her involved. "All good, thanks." I saw her out, staring at the empty but oil-stained driveway, a reminder Linda wouldn't quit. Linda had escalated the war, and I knew I had to act, not just to protect the driveway, but my family. I grabbed my phone, texted Ryan, "Linda just fined me for oil stains she caused. I need your help." Linda might think she held the power, but I'd show her I wouldn't back down. After the violation notice, I thought Linda might pause, at least to save face after the police sided with me. But I'd underestimated her stubbornness. A week passed quietly, Linda avoiding me, only glaring from afar when we crossed paths outside. I focused on George. He had knee surgery coming up at St. Jude, and I juggled work and caring for him. Long night shifts left me drained, my eyes stinging from lack of sleep, but I kept things steady. The clear driveway was a small win, and I naively thought Linda had learned her lesson. Then came Saturday morning when I planned to take George to a pre-surgery checkup. I woke at 7, brewed coffee and pulled the living room blinds to rouse him. But when I looked outside, I nearly dropped my mug. Not only was Linda's silver gray SUV back in the driveway, this time a small black sedan parked right behind it, fully blocking the exit. The two cars stood like a steel wall, obstructing the driveway and George's ramp, fresh oil from the SUV pooling into a new stain. I froze, jaw-dropping, unable to believe my eyes. Linda hadn't just returned, she'd doubled down on the provocation. I rushed to the porch in my pajamas and slippers, the cold Maple Grove morning prickling my skin. George rolled to the door, his voice raspy from sleep. "Everything okay, Emma?" I turned, forcing calm despite my racing heart. "Linda's at it again, Dad. 2 cars this time." He sighed, shook his head. "She doesn't know respect." I squeezed his hand through the doorway, saying, "I'll handle it. Don't worry." But inside I was seething. George's appointment was 2 hours away. I didn't have time for Linda's games. I banged on Linda's door, fists hammering loud enough to echo across Oak Street. No answer. I shouted, "Linda, get out here. You blocked my driveway with 2 cars." Still silence. I asked a nearby neighbor, old Mrs. Mary at 16, but she shook her head. Haven't seen her this morning. Linda was either hiding or ignoring me on purpose. I returned to the driveway, staring at the two cars. The SUV hers. The sedan, maybe a friend's or relative's. Why did she think my driveway was a public lot? I was done with patience. Ryan's words echoed. You can tow any unauthorized vehicle on your property. I pulled out my phone, checked the security camera. Footage showed Linda parking the SUV at 6 a.m. Then a stranger parking the sedan behind it, both laughing before walking off. I snapped current photos. Two cars blocking the way, oil stains, the ramp obstructed, evidence locked. I called Portland Towing again, voice trembling with anger, but firm. Hi, I need 2 unauthorized cars towed from my driveway, 14 Oak Street, Maple Grove. Yes, 2. The dispatcher chuckled. You again, we'll send 2 trucks right over. Within 30 minutes, 2 tow trucks arrived, the familiar white one from before, and a new blue one. The drivers stepped out, surveyed the scene, and shook their heads. Someone really doesn't like you, huh? The first driver, Mike, I recalled, said smirking. I shrugged. She won't learn. They got to work, chains clanking as they hooked the SUV, then the sedan. I stood on the porch, hands in my pajama pockets, watching the tires lift off. The SUV went first, leaving a fresh oil streak, then the sedan followed. George watched from the door through the glass, giving a small smile. You did good, he said as I came back in. But I didn't feel fully relieved. My hands shook as I shut the door, adrenaline still coursing through me. Seeing both cars towed was surreal. I felt vindicated, but anxious about Linda's reaction. She'd shown no respect for my property, no care for George, and now I'd hit back harder than ever. I knew the law was on my side. Ryan had made that clear, but Linda wasn't the type to take defeat lying down. I helped George get ready for his appointment, wheeling him to the car parked on the street, but my mind stayed on that empty driveway. 2 hours later, as we returned home from the clinic, I heard the screech of brakes outside. I stood behind the living room blinds, gripping the fabric tightly, watching Linda yell into her phone on the empty driveway. George sat beside me, his wheelchair parked near the sofa, his eyes peering through the gap. What's she doing? He asked, voice raspy. Probably calling the police again, I replied, trying to sound calm despite my pounding heart. His checkup had just finished. The doctor said everything was set for surgery next week, but now I faced Linda's wrath. I'd towed both her cars this morning, and her reaction came faster than I'd expected. Linda paced back and forth, arms flailing, her shrill voice cutting through Maple Grove's cold air. I turned to help George with simple physical therapy, arm lifts, leg stretches, but Linda's shouting broke my focus. Where is she? I want her out here now. George shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. She's really lost it. I nodded, lowering his hand. I'll go out, you rest. I stood, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the porch, closing the door so George wouldn't hear more. Linda whipped around when she saw me, face flushed, eyes wild. You towed both my cars, she screamed, her voice cracking with rage, finger jabbing at my face. You're insane. I'll sue you. I crossed my arms, keeping my tone even despite the adrenaline surge. Both cars were parked without permission on my property, blocking my dad's access. I've warned you enough, Linda. She stepped closer, breathing heavily. I'm the HOA president. This is harassment. I'm calling the police. You'll be arrested. She raised her phone, dialing with trembling fingers, shouting into it. I need police now. She towed my cars twice. I'm being attacked. I stood still, watching her performance, feeling both angry and exhausted. Linda could scream all she wanted, but I knew the law was on my side. 15 minutes later, a Portland Police Department cruiser rolled into Oak Street. I recognized Reynolds and Martinez, the pair from last time, stepping out, their faces weary as if they'd anticipated this. Linda rushed them, arms waving. You have to arrest her. She towed my car twice, this time 2 cars. It's illegal. Reynolds sighed, raising a hand to slow her. Miss Carter, calm down. We need both sides. Martinez turned to me, nodding slightly. Miss Harper, you called for another tow? I nodded, pulling my phone from my jacket pocket. Yes, she parked 2 cars blocking my driveway this morning, her SUV and another sedan. I've got photos and video. I handed the phone to Martinez, opening the security camera app. The footage showed Linda parking the SUV at 6 a.m., then a man parking the sedan behind it, both laughing before walking off. I added, my dad had a doctor's appointment this morning, and they blocked the driveway and wheelchair ramp. I called Portland Towing, showed them my property papers, and they towed both cars. Reynolds watched, nodded, then turned to Linda. Miss Carter, we explained last time, this is private property. Miss Harper can tow unauthorized vehicles. Linda shrieked, her voice breaking, but I'm the HOA president. I have parking rights for work. She's ruining my life. Martinez sighed, his tone firmer. You don't have rights to park on someone else's property, no matter who you are. We've been clear. Linda started panting, clutching her chest. She's destroying me. I'll fine her through the HOA, she'll regret this. Reynolds crossed his arms, frowning. You called us over suspected illegal towing. We checked, there's no crime here. If you want your cars back, pay the tow fees. Linda's eyes bulged, her face shifting from red to purple. Fees? You expect me to pay for 2 cars? She should be arrested. Martinez stepped forward, voice stern. Miss Carter, the law doesn't care if you're HOA president. This is Harper's property, and you trespassed. If you keep filing false reports, you'll be fined for wasting our time. Linda choked, her eyes glistening like she might cry. I'll ruin her. She doesn't know who I am. She spun toward me, finger trembling. You'll lose everything, house, money, all of it. I stood still, arms crossed, letting her vent. Linda screamed until her voice gave out, spit flying, face crimson, but she had nothing left to say. The climax hit when she realized both cars were at the impound, double fees, no way out. Linda shook, tears spilling, not from remorse but from humiliation and helplessness. Reynolds nodded at me. No crime here. We're done. They got in their car and left, leaving Linda gasping. She turned to me, voice quaking. I hope you're happy, Harper. You've made an enemy you can't beat. I met her gaze, silent. Her phone rang, probably the impound, and she stormed off, muttering curses. Linda left my driveway, shoulders trembling with rage, her footsteps fading into Oak Street's quiet. I stood behind the door, leaning against the wooden frame, my breath slowing as adrenaline ebbed. George rolled closer, his eyes reflecting relief mixed with worry. Is she done? He asked. I gave a faint smile, nodding. Not yet, Dad, but this time she lost. He chuckled softly, rolling back to the sofa, turning on the TV as if to dispel the tension. I stepped into the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and gulped it down to soothe my dry throat. Linda could threaten all she liked, but the police had made it clear. I was right, she was wrong. Days later, Maple Grove grew oddly peaceful. Linda stopped parking in my driveway, didn't show up at my door with yells or violation notices. I saw her a few times, grabbing mail or walking the street, but she avoided my gaze, only glaring from afar with a sour face. I figured she was quietly plotting, but I didn't care much. I was busy with George, taking him for his final pre-surgery check, picking up extra shifts at the hospital to cover costs. The empty driveway was a small victory, and I savored every minute, though I knew Linda wasn't one to give up easily. Then word spread. One evening, as I washed dishes after dinner, Lisa Bennett knocked. She stepped in, holding a box of fresh-baked cookies, a wide grin on her face. Emma, you've got to hear this, she said, setting the box on the kitchen table. Tom just got back from the HOA meeting. The whole neighborhood's buzzing about you and Linda. I frowned, wiping my hands on a towel, sitting down. Buzzing how? Lisa laughed. Tom told everyone. 2 tows, police visits, Linda screaming in the street. They're calling her tow truck queen behind her back. She's totally humiliated. I laughed, feeling real relief for the first time in weeks. Lisa went on. At the meeting, Linda tried to justify it, said you harassed her, ruined her HOA work. But Tom and a few others spoke up. They brought up her fining us for the fence paint, measuring Jake's grass. Someone, I think Mrs. Mary, even asked point blank, if you don't respect people's property, Why should we respect you? Linda turned red, stammered, but no one took her side. I listened, stunned by the shift. Linda had been Maple Grove's terror, but now her grip was slipping. Lisa leaned in, voice lower. Someone suggested a vote to oust her as president. Not official yet, but Tom said the room was tense. Linda knows she's in danger. She's held that seat because people feared her, but after this, they're doubting. I nodded, feeling both satisfied and cautious. She won't take losing well, I said. Lisa shrugged. Maybe. But you showed everyone she's not invincible. That's a start. I walked Lisa out, watching her head home under the streetlights. Closing the door, I leaned against it, thinking. Linda's loss of credibility was unexpected. I just wanted to protect George, not reshape the neighborhood. But Lisa's news lightened me. I joined George in the living room, sitting beside him. He looked up from the TV, asking, "What'd the neighbor say?" I recounted it, and he laughed hard, a rare sound these days. "You made me proud, Emma." She deserved that. The days after, Maple Grove seemed different. Neighbors greeted me more. Mrs. Mary waved when I got the mail. Jake at 7 winked and said, "You're my hero." Linda was still there, but her presence felt smaller. She didn't dare park in my driveway, though her glares remained sharp whenever we crossed paths. I knew she hadn't given up. Linda was too proud to accept total defeat, but this time, I had the neighborhood quietly behind me. One early morning I stood on the porch, cradling a hot coffee mug, steam rising in Maple Grove's crisp air. The driveway stretched empty before me, free of the silver-gray SUV or oil stains. George was inside, eating breakfast, a slice of toast with strawberry jam he loved, gearing up for tomorrow's knee surgery. I gazed at Oak Street, the old maples swaying their pale gold leaves in the dawn light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a touch of peace. The fight with Linda had drained me, but it taught me that standing up for family was worth every hassle. Linda was still there, steps from my house, but she no longer haunted me. After the second tow and her collapse before the police, her power in Maple Grove faded. Neighbors whispered about her, tow truck queen, and though she clung to her HOA presidency, her credibility teetered. I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Linda's pride wouldn't let her forget this loss, and her glares reminded me she could strike back any time. But now, I wasn't afraid. I had evidence, the law and the neighborhood's quiet support. She wanted war. I was ready. I stepped inside, set my coffee on the table, and sat by George. He looked up, smiling, a rare grin amid his arthritis pain. "You're stronger than I thought, Emma," he said, voice warm. I took his hand, warmth spreading from his thin palm. "I learned from you," I replied. He laughed, and I leaned back, letting the adrenaline of recent days fade. Linda might be a nightmare, but I'd protected him, and that mattered most. The tale of Emma Harper and Linda Carter in Maple Grove, Oregon, mirrors a real slice of life in the U.S. today, the tension between individual rights and community power, especially in HOA neighborhoods. In modern America, where private property rights are fiercely guarded by law, HOA rules often spark debate due to overreach by figures like Linda, a classic Karen with her arrogance and control. Emma's fight wasn't just about a blocked driveway, it was about shielding her family, specifically her dad George, who relied on that path for his wheelchair, from Linda's absurdity, wielding her HOA presidency to impose her will. Details like Linda fining Emma for oil stains her own car caused, or parking 2 cars in retaliation, highlight the power abuses common in American communities, where some see rules as tools for dominance, not harmony. The story's lesson is practical. In the U.S., you must know your rights and be ready to fight when they're breached, but do it smartly with proof. Emma didn't just react emotionally, she installed a camera, took photos, and consulted lawyer Ryan to act legally, like calling Portland Towing twice. It's a reminder that facing real-life Lindas, from nosy neighbors to overreaching officials, requires staying calm, gathering evidence, like videos of Linda tearing notes, and leaning on the law, like Martinez and Reynolds confirmed. Plus, the quiet backing from neighbors like Tom and Lisa shows community can be a silent strength, but you have to stand up first. Learn from Emma. When injustice hits in America, don't cave to fear. Arm yourself with knowledge, patience, and legal action to reclaim what's yours. Don't forget to subscribe for more battles with real-life Lindas. Thanks for joining me in this story, and see you in the next episode.